Last summer during my sabbatical, Karen and I took a cruise up the Rhine River. That was something we wanted to do back in 2020 as a way of celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary. But this thing called COVID came along and it interrupted our plans. The 2020 cruise was canceled. Our 40th anniversary wasn't canceled. We still had that. It was just the cruise that got canceled. So last year we cruised up the Rhine River to celebrate our 44th anniversary instead. There are many highlights on a trip like that, but one of the ones that I enjoyed the most was at our very first stop in Basel, Switzerland. There in the center of town, our tour guide led us up to the famous Tingley Fountain. On, on this site, where this fountain now operated, there was once stood a grand old European theater. But unfortunately, in the early 1970s, that theater caught fire and was severely damaged. Much to the dismay of many of the local citizens, the city leaders, only in the interest of progress, mind you, decided to tear the grand old theater completely down and replace it with a new modern one. One of the dissenters of that decision was a kinetic sculptor named Jean Tingley. He and a financial backer bought much of the old ironworks that were a part of that old European theater, and they also bought the actual site where the old theater sat. And there, Mr. Tingley created this unique work of kinetic art that's in motion. The sculptures in the fountain are supposed to remind you of the dancers that once appeared on stage in that grand old European theater. Now, here's the fascinating part to me. Each sculpture in that fountain is created completely out of repurposed scrap iron from the old theater, iron taken from the original theater and repurposed to be something else. What was once destined for the scrap heap was repurposed into something brand new. You and I are in the liturgical season of Lent, right, of Easter right now, the period of time when we celebrate the time that Jesus spent on earth between his resurrection, Easter Sunday, and his ascension, which we'll celebrate on the first Sunday in June. So essentially, this month of May is all about taking a time where we talk about the things that become new because of the resurrection of Jesus. A time when old things that were destined for the scrap heap of history are redeemed and repurposed for something new and beautiful, for something that's brand new. It's a time that Isaiah prophesied about when he said in the chapter 43 of his book, "Be alert, be present. I'm about to do something brand new. It's bursting out. Don't you see it?" There are many things that are new because of because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Not only new things around us, but new in the lives of people. The Apostle Paul probably was thinking about himself and about how new he was when he wrote the words in Second Corinthians 5:17. What we see, he says, is that anyone who's united with the Messiah gets a fresh start. They're created new. The old life is gone, a new life emerges. Old things become new. That truth is beautifully illustrated in the two men who are the center of the two of the readings that we shared just a moment ago. There we first met a man named Saul, a Jew. In fact, Saul was the perfect Jew. When he writes in the book of Philippians, the third chapter, he tells you about how he was born to the very right family. He was educated by the best scholars, the right people. He was passionate about his Jewish faith. So passionate, in fact, was he that he chased down Christians all over the region just so he could torture them and imprison them for no crime other than the fact that they were followers of Jesus Christ. He was a perfect Jew. He just did the Jew thing as good as anybody could do it. In a couple chapters, though, we would come to know this same man by his Roman name, Paul. He would be the same man who wrote those words that I shared with you just a moment ago. That should say Corinthians, not Chronicles. What we see is that anyone united with the Messiah gets a fresh start. They're created new. So, as we saw in that ninth chapter of the book of Acts, God took a man named Saul, headed in a completely wrong direction, and gave him a brand new purpose. In fact, in the verses that are later beyond the reading that we said there, God specifically says to Ananias, "This man Paul, this man Saul, is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and to their kings." God moved him from being Saul the persecutor to Paul the proclaimer. And like that old iron in that old European theater, Saul was reshaped into something brand new. And then in the gospel letter, we heard about gospel reading. We heard about Peter, the boisterous disciple who denied even knowing Jesus, denied him 3 times, despite boasting that he would never do anything like that. He said, "Even if everybody else falls away, I will never do that." But Jesus reminded him, "Yes, you will. Yes, you will. You will do it." And Peter, of course, did. He denied Jesus. Standing in the courtyard while Jesus was on trial, he denied Jesus not once, not twice, but 3 times. In Luke's version of that story, Luke has this wonderful detail that the other gospel writers don't claim. He says that in the moments in the moments right after that third denial, when the rooster crowed, Jesus and Peter made eye contact. They looked at each other, and in that moment, Peter realized what he had done. That had to deeply impact Peter, had to cut him right to the very quick, had to hurt deeply. So deeply, in fact, that Luke records that Peter went outside and he wept bitterly. Because of his denial, Peter was certain that he was destined for the scrap heap of history. Once he had been part of the inner circle of Jesus, he was the one who would first acknowledge that Jesus was the Messiah. And yet he denied Jesus at the very time Jesus needed him the most. So certain was he that he was destined to the scrap heap that he decided to return to his former occupation. He decided he was going to go fishing. But Jesus had other plans for him. Peter was not to be destined to be bulldozed over with the rest of the rubble. No, Jesus took this broken down disciple and gave him a brand new purpose. He tells Peter in the verses that I read to you, "Feed my sheep." God reshaped Peter from being Peter the fisherman to Peter the sheep feeder. And like the iron in that old European theater, Peter became something brand new. Now, those are 2 nice stories, 2 very nice stories, 2 stories with happy endings. And who doesn't like stories with a happy ending? But so what? What difference do 2 stories about 2 men that you and I have never met personally, what difference does that make for you and me today? Well, let me give you a couple of insights. Here's the first one. No matter what someone has done, Jesus Christ offers them a brand new start. Recently, we were studying the story of Saul's conversion, and one of the participants in our Bible study said, "I don't understand why God would forgive somebody like Saul." I mean, after all, he went on, Saul was one bad dude. Think of all the people that whose lives he disrupted, the people that he tortured, maybe even killed. And he was wrong. Not just wrong, he was very wrong. He was very, very wrong about what he believed and about the way he went about enforcing what he believed. Passionate, yes, but wrong, very much so. We had to remind that participant in the Bible study that Peter was wrong too. But Peter was kind of wrong, where Paul was very, very wrong. Peter, we can look at Peter and we can say, all right, I can see how God would forgive Peter. But Saul, look at what he did. Look at all the things that he did. So on the one hand, you have wrong. On the other hand, you have very, very wrong. How does God deal with that? Paul knew he was wrong. He knew he was very wrong. In fact, when he writes to Timothy, he says that here's a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. Christ came into the world to save sinners, of whom I'm the worst. You didn't have to convince Paul that he was very, very wrong. He got it. He knew he was. But he went on and he said, God forgave me for that very reason. I was shown mercy because I was the worst sinner of them all. Because in me, Christ would to display his immense patience as an example for those who would believe in him. In other words, Paul says, if God can forgive me for what I've done, he'll surely forgive you. Paul says, I'm at the one end of the spectrum. I'm at one end of the scale. Every other person who's ever sinned is on a lower end of the scale. If you picture the scale as Peter on this end who did something wrong and Paul on this end who did something very, very wrong, Paul says, you can't get past me. And if God could forgive me, then God can forgive you. Wherever we find ourselves on that scale. Now, here's the second insight. This brand new start that gets talked about here is only possible because of what Jesus did on Easter. It's only possible because of Jesus Christ. Recently, I went to my doctor, and he did a check of my blood sugar levels. And he said to me, well, I've done all I can do. The rest is up to you. And he's right. My blood sugar is my issue, and I alone can bring it down from this point on. I'm the only one with the power to say no to chocolate chip cookies in Reese's peanut butter cups. That's me. That is all on me. And I thought, sometimes that's how we approach our relationship with Christ, isn't it? It's all on me. Only I can fix me. But let me tell you, that never works. We can say, this time I'm going to stick with my morning devotions. I'm going to follow them all the way through. I'm never going to miss another day. And maybe that will set things right with God. Or we could say, I'm going to watch my mouth. And I'm not going to say those things that I've been saying to people. Or I'm only going to think happy, positive thoughts. But when it comes to forgiveness, it's not us. It's totally different. I can fix my diabetes with my doctor's help. There's a role I have to play. But when it comes to my forgiveness, there's nothing I can do. That's all on Jesus. It's all about what Jesus does in me and through me and for me. That's the issue Martin Luther struggled with as he was coming to his understanding about what was happening in the scriptures and dealing with it and birthed the Protestant Reformation. Luther says in that quote that's up here that when we hear that we've been promised forgiveness of sins, we can't really grasp that. And so we take this position. I've committed this sin or that sin, so I have to pay for them. And I'll do this or so. Fast X number of days, say X number of prayers, fund X number of poorhouses, pay for all my sins. And he says it's because of human nature that human nature is proud and always wants to be in control, pulling its own water bucket out of the well. And we want to have the honor of laying down the first stone of being number one. That's why the message of salvation is such a majestic message. And then he says this quote, we must believe that our righteousness, salvation, and comfort lie outside of ourselves. Namely, that we are righteous because before God, acceptable to him, holy and wise, even though there is nothing within us but sin, injustice, and stupidity. I can do something about my blood sugar, but I can't do anything about my sin level. Only Jesus could fix that. And on Easter, he did. On Easter, he did. And because of Easter, Jesus offers everybody, you and me alike, regardless of what our past has been, regardless of what our life is like, he gives us an opportunity to become remade brand new, just like that iron in that old European theater. That's why Isaiah writes, I'm about to do something brand new. Don't miss it. Don't miss it. God wants to do something new in you and through you. Whether you feel worthy of him doing that or not, whether you feel as if your best days are behind you or before you, even if you think you can do it all on your own, the promise of Easter is that Christ makes all things new. Amen.